Today on Loki Legends, I sit down with the brand king of Austin, Texas, Christian Helms, the founder of Helms Workshop, a brand and design agency that has helped to build some of Austin's most beloved brands like Howler Brothers and Tecovas, and partnering with some global icons like Southern Comfort, Whole Foods, Jack Daniels, just to name a few. In this episode, we get into the power of physical goods and how branding leads to transformative business impact.
The best branding doesn't describe an experience. It really is an experience in itself.
We know a brand is so much more than type and colors and icons, but in this episode, we go deep into how strategy can influence the design process and to help create work that truly builds true fans.
If your reaction to the brand is an academic exercise where you're breaking it down that way, we haven't done our job. You should feel it.
We talk music, Texas culture, and a plethora of other topics. So buckle up your boots, partner, and let's get into the episode with Christian Helms. Christian Helms, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Hey, Brett, it's good to see you, man. I've been excited to chat.
I've been excited to dive into this kind of world of branding kind of meets physical goods.
Yeah.
And I was curious to get your perspective, but also ask you, what was the first physical product that you fell in love with?
Oh, wow. Probably the Air Jordans right behind me. Actually, even before that, or more importantly than that, I'll talk about the Jordans later. But it was skate graphics from when I was a kid. I was a little skate kid in a tiny little mill town in Bessemer City, North Carolina, like a tiny little southern town. I was like the one skate kid, the lonely wheels running across the street. And I just fell in love with the graphics, like the Slime Balls logo or the Santa Cruz screaming hand. I don't know if you've ever seen that, Mark, but they're just amazing. They're so cool. I was not a great skateboarder, but I had all the stickers lined up. So I kind of fell in love with graphic design and branding, probably starting then.
I feel like that visual aesthetic was just so cool that you couldn't deny that it was cool, even if it wasn't like your thing.
I mean, it's pretty analogous to a lot of what we do, right? Like a board is a board is a board and wheels are wheels. Like there are tiny differences, but your product is not going to be revolutionarily beyond the other brand. So you're selling the brand as much as you're selling the object, you know. If you can get past the functional benefits of a skate wheel and get into, or a skate deck, and get into like the emotional benefits, like how it makes you feel or how it makes you feel about yourself, or the social benefits, what it says about you. You know, it's a bigger, deeper thing. You're really buying that as much as you're buying a piece of wood.
There is that emotional benefit, and I feel like it ties into the power of physical goods. And I know that is a huge part of what you're doing at Helms. And in an increasingly digital world, what is the power of physical goods in today's age and maybe even going into the future?
There's so much great going on digitally at this point. Like, I mean, oh my gosh, it's insane what the change that we've seen in our lifetime and the change that my kids are going to see. But we're never going to get away from the natural draw to tangible physical things, something you can pick up and hold and consider and keep. It just has a gravity to it that's really valuable. I don't see that going away. I mean, I think the resurgence of vinyl over the past 20 years is a great example, right? It's like people got sick of CDs and digital, and they went back to buying vinyl so they could have this thing that they can own, but also sort of a totem, right? Like this marker of like, this is a moment that I was really into band X, Y, or Z, right? And I think that's never going to go away. I'm a geek for books. I don't read on a tablet. I hate reading on a tablet. I have a friend who's a New York Times bestselling author. He reads a ton on a tablet. I can't do it. I cannot do it. So I have just a wall of books over here, and it drives my wife crazy because they're constantly showing up. But yeah, it's nice to own the physical thing. If it's digital, it's too easy to forget about and let disappear. It's kind of like all the orphan photos in your iPhone, right? If it's a physical thing, you consider it more and differently and more deeply often, you know?
And even going back to music and maybe any physical item in general, but you have to, and this does obviously works the same if you're buying something digitally, but buying something physically, it's taking up space in your house. So it has to mean something to you to physically put your money and invest in that item, something that you want to keep or hold on to for an extended period of time. And I think that vinyl is a great example of that. Books are a great example of that. And they mean more to us because they're things that we also, I think, can pass down to either a next generation or share with people by giving them the physical item. And then it reflects us back to them and they can have that shared memory and experience as well.
Absolutely, man. I think about that so much now. With just the Amazon is such a blessing and a curse, and that anything you can imagine can be straight from China here in a
Hmm.
heartbeat. I mean, they even at this point, the algorithm puts the stuff on the truck before you buy it because they know you're going to buy it. It's amazing. But I really think about, like, again, it's almost cliche because we talk about it so much, but the value of something you can pass down and keep long term. I have two sons, and I think about, like, the knife I carry every day. Like, that'll be my son's knife when he gets older. It has a lasting, tangible value, and buying one thing once that lasts a lifetime is so much more valuable than buying five of them over the course of time. And I think you kind of try to build brands in the same way, right? Like, you want a timelessness to them, even though they very much are of the moment and need to be fresh and contemporary. They should have elements that can age and hold on.
So you would just mention the fact that it's so much more rewarding to have that one thing that you have for an extended period of time opposed to buying five. And I think there is like this business difference or maybe outlook of like if they have to buy five over their lifetime, that's five instances of income that we get as a company, opposed to the lasting benefits that a person has in a connection to that brand and the stories that they form around that brand by only having to purchase it once and really being masters of their craft. Their product can actually last for a generation or more.
Yeah, it's how you stay around for 180 years or whatever, right? It's playing the long game where you're saying, I'm only going to sell this person one pair of boots, and I'm going to repair them if they need it. But they're going to tell five people about how great these boots are, and we'll get the sales that way versus, having them fall apart and selling five boots. And I love when there's a real handshake like that, where, Red Wing repairing boots, Patagonia repairing, all their goods, Benchmade, the knife company that I
Hmm.
sort of go to. You can send it back for any and everything you want. Like, it's a really cool relationship that speaks to the values and sort of ethos of the company. So when that walk is there, it's really resonant.
I think that comes also down to like making things that people actually want to keep. And I think that is something that Helms and you guys are doing exceptionally well. So we were talking a little bit offline about my trip to Austin in 2017, and I went with my wife to Austin Street Brewing, and I've had these since 2017. They're the only koozies I basically allowed in the house.
I love it. You've got my Austin Beer Works Renegade koozie, which is the world's first ever koozie for when you renegade and shotgun a beer.
Yes.
It's completely impractical. It doesn't need to be cold for the 3 seconds before you jam a key in it and chug it. And that's why I love it. Yeah, those guys, the work that I did with them is a great example of what we try to do, which is just defy the trash can, right? Like, create this object that you not only want and just have to seek out and pick up and hold and buy and take home, but you want to keep. You want to keep the package. You want it to sit around. With Beerworks, we've had people dress up as the cans for Halloween. We've seen tattoos. We've seen babies born and announced as a little Austin Beerworks can. It's insane. It's insane, but it's so cool. So if we can do that, if we can create a little bit of culture in addition to creating a product, I think for us, it's all about, kind of, our benchmark is when we build a brand, we want it to bring joy and value to people's lives. We definitely want to move the needle for our clients, and we want to sell a lot of X, Y, or Z, but you can do both, and it's so much more meaningful, a relationship with your customer. when they become sort of a member of the tribe.
How the hell to even do that? Are there things that you think about in the branding process or strategy, or how you tap into like the emotional side of like the buying experience? How can I think like Helms a little bit more to connect to an audience to make either physical or digital goods that are more emotionally charged and don't
Yeah.
end up in the trash can?
Yeah, we absolutely, before I get into that piece, we love strategy. We're huge on strategy. I'm a terrible decorative designer. Like, I can't just make things look cool. I've got to have a purpose and a message and a goal, or otherwise I'm just lost in a sea of confusion. And so we absolutely nail strategy as the first part of what we do. But then when you get into creating the product, it's so layered. I think one of the things I talk about a lot at the studio is the best branding doesn't describe an experience. It really is an experience in itself. And when you see it on the shelf or walk into the environment, color, texture, materiality, graphic design, language, all these things should combine to give you a true sense of what the experience of interacting with the product is. Even if you see it digitally, you should get a real sense of the personality and the vibe and the character of the thing. And that happens in big ways and small ways. You know, you've got to grab attention first. So you need that big shot across the bow. But we love to bake in little things that you might not notice until your fifth or sixth time interacting with the brand, these little Easter eggs or tiny moments as well, which are often more endearing than the big kind of bombastic moments of brand, you know? It's just about layering and considering, we talk about this a lot, considering, every aspect and every element as an opportunity to kind of inform or surprise or delight or pique curiosity. It's easy, especially when you do something many, many times, to start overlooking pieces of it because you've done it one way before. There's always an opportunity to surprise somebody in the little stuff as well. So it's just about, running really hard at it and wanting it to be, bigger and more than the client even imagines it can be. It's a tremendous amount of extra effort and consideration, but it also, like, it's what makes it good and fun and valuable.
Is that something that you notice that a client immediately resonates with or picks up on?
It is all over the map, Brett. It depends on the client and how savvy they are and how experienced they are. We have had presentation moments where we barely get the work on the screen before the client gets it. And it's like, oh my God, X, Y, and Z. I see this, I see that. And then there are other clients where you have to slowly and methodically take them through the decision making and explain what does what and how it achieves the goal and kind of lead them to the conclusion that this is great. It really just depends. But those light bulb moments where the minute they see it, we had a client start crying the other day, like happy crying.
That's incredible. That's the
Yeah, we're
biggest
working on
win
a fashion
ever.
brand that's like Midland, Texas meets Milan, Italy. It's super fun. It just seeing that is unbelievable. And I think tagging back to something you nodded to earlier, we've got to have strategy. We've got to reach certain goals and metrics and KPIs. But the right clients come to you for your point of view. Like, they
Mm.
want a unique approach. They don't want the same thing that you've done for brand X, but they want the same thinking that led you to that thing for brand X. And those are our favorites, man. The folks who want something different. You know, I worked in music early in my career, and I worked with a band called Modest Mouse. And one of the things that Isaac always talked about is, like, he would write a really perfect, pretty song and then find little ways to make it weird and screw it up. And we kind of do that with brand. It's like there's always a pretty direct path to a really solid brand once you get into strategy in the brief. But, like, how do we deviate from that and create these different opportunities that are a little outside the norm or that challenge people a little bit? Or, it's like jazz. It's like the notes you don't play that they fill in the blank for. Those are the really cool moments.
Mm.
I don't know if that makes any sense. And the more I use my hands often, the less sense. But I'm super passionate about it. I hope it makes sense because it's a
It makes
big part of
sense.
what I love about this thing.
It well in the the form of like music or jazz, even it's that tension and release. And what
Yes.
it sounds like to me is that it's the human elements that those moments of quirkiness or imperfection make us appreciate it more.
Yes.
And Christian, you hopefully you know what's the Bruce Springsteen album that he recorded in the bathroom?
Nebraska.
Yes.
Nebraska, yeah. That was supposed to be a demo. That was not supposed to be an album. And once they tried to cut it with the band, it just didn't have the same soul. And so they released the demo. I love that. Look, I get goosebumps talking about it. I love that story. Yeah, it's the human element. It's we talk about this a lot as well, where it's like, how do we infuse real humanity into what we do? Because it's digital, it's printed, it
Hmm.
it doesn't theoretically have a soul, but it can, you know. And often, like you said, it's the quirks or imperfections. Like think about the first White Stripes song you heard. It's not the chorus; it's the weird piece of feedback right before they kick into the chorus. You know, those little
Hmm.
things that sort of jar you out of your expectation are really valuable.
I think that there's a group of people out there that might look at design and not understand that there's strategy behind it. And I'm just going to hold this up for example,
They're called
where
our parents. Yeah, exactly.
where it's an armadillo and there's like these bubbles around it. Maybe he's a little bit buzzed, this armadillo, and he's floating in maybe the um, of course the river's gonna that escapes my name at the moment in Austin, but or Ladybird Lake maybe.
There you go. Do
But
not float in Lady Bird Lake, by the way, when you come back to Austin. But go ahead.
I think that that's a good question for the doubters out there. That how can a fun illustration be tied to strategy, and how can it play off the emotional response of the audience to make them connect with this brand?
Yeah. I'm going to turn the answer on its head because a
Mm,
big part of what we do is also just making something cool and exciting, you know? And there is a nonsensical Bob Ross happy accident element to what we do where sometimes you create something remarkable and then back into strategy to find the way it ties to the brand. That can actually be really good because it's a lateral thinking, unexpected move. But in those cases, you can trace the end consumer shouldn't see the brief in the work. They should just be delighted with the work because the brief's boring. Like that's the whole point. It's like the brief is a white sheet of paper that my brand manager Ryan hands to me, and we obligatorily review together as a team. And it's great, and it sets the stage. But if you if your reaction to the brand is an academic exercise where you're breaking it down that way, we haven't done our job. You should feel
mm,
it, and you should just want it and be intrigued by it. If you're digging that deep into strategy when you look at it, then we've done something wrong, right? That
mm.
that gets into the like, what the hell were they thinking space that can be good and can be bad depending on how you get there.
I do find that it is incredibly powerful looking at a mistake that you make because it takes you out of your conventional
Yes.
thought pattern, and it's just never something that you personally would ever do. That's why it's a mistake in your mind until you actually look at it through a different lens. And I find that those are truly like the most magical moments. That's been really, really top of mind, and I've experienced it in more detail over the course of projects recently, where some of the mistakes that we make or technical things in development have just influenced the rest of the project just because we've noticed, okay, we can do it a different way. Or we thought it was going to take this many hours to do this thing, but then we accidentally did this and then it worked. So we just saved a bunch of time.
That's the fun stuff. Uncertainty is one of the best parts of the process. I think early on in your career, you want to listen as little as possible, go away and make something you love, and then try to get the client to love it. And at this point in my career, I like not knowing what the hell we're going to do. Like, I like the idea that, like, I don't see the solution immediately, and we're going to have to find this thing together as a studio and as an interaction and collaboration with the client. Um, you know, when you're younger, you want everything to be just, CA worthy, design award, amazing. And that's definitely a goal. But
Mhm.
the joy in it now is like not knowing and searching and finding. And I think you alluded earlier to, we're working on a project right now We're working on a brewery project actually, and we've done so many breweries. Like we have branded a lot of beer. Um, and so it's a bit of a challenge to approach it in a different way. And my designers, Cooper and Greg, the work was terrible at the beginning because they were trying to do something really different and inventive. And it's hard to get there. It's easy to use muscle memory and do the things you've done before. To really try to do something different, it's going to be bad for a long time before it gets good. And I love that struggle. Like I didn't love it as a young creative, but I love it now because it's a really great designer has the tenacity to stick with it and keep pushing it and make it good. Even with tough feedback from a client, right? It's like my team is so good about getting tough feedback and coming back with something stronger or better. And I don't think I was as good at that when I was a solo designer early in my career. I just
Ooh.
love that tenacity and that challenge.
Well, that's the hard stuff because if you get it from bad feedback from a client, that can be devastating and demoralizing and maybe put fear into you so that you're not coming back with good work, let's say the second time or the third time. So I guess as a creative lead, how do you inspire the team to maybe keep pushing forward in that process when the first couple of ideas aren't working and you're trying to get to that inventive solution? And then maybe the latter part of that is like pushing past that negative feedback to get to really, really positive results with a client.
The latter part, the tough feedback and rallying, I think a lot of it is kind of branding jujitsu, where you use the client's momentum just to kind of throw them where you want them to go, or in a different direction than they had planned. But there are great ways to do that, and we spend a lot of time talking with our clients and understanding the why as much as the what. So we can really speak to that. And then in terms of motivating the team, first and foremost, like I just have really tenacious, really no ego, like driven designers and writers and strategists and folks on the team. So they're sort of, I think we've just created a culture over time where it's expected and it
Mm.
doesn't have to be said as much as it did in the beginning, because we've got everyone kind of leading by example and sort of supporting each other in that way. So there's plenty that I do to reinforce that stuff and to foster a spirit of it's okay to make mistakes, and that's fantastic. Like keep pushing. I would rather you do something that's way out there and probably beyond what the client can wrap their head around if it's really good, than sort of dumb down your work in the beginning because you think it's probably what's going to be most acceptable. Like good is good if it solves the problem in a brilliant way. Mission accomplished, and we can always back up a little bit if we need to, if the client doesn't have the appetite to be that provocative or bold or whatever. But we don't want to have a chilling effect where we kind of self edit that early in the process.
I was curious if it was more nature versus nurture, and it sounds like maybe a little bit of both, but cultivating an environment where the ego is taken out of the work and there's more receptivity and knowing it's not about you personally as a designer, but just trying to get to the result of what is best for the client, or maybe even pushing the client to see the vision and the beauty within that execution that may seem a little bit out there at the moment, but could be kind of over the course of a couple weeks, maybe more palatable.
Yeah, and the other thing is time is such a great factor where often, we've had situations where we've gone back to revise the brand and ultimately the client has realized where we were in the beginning was the right place to be. A truly unique brand kind of has to be reckoned with, right? Like if you see something you've never seen before, you really have to take a minute and absorb it. If it looks just like brand X, Y, and Z on the shelf, you can quickly catalog it and say, "Oh, that's a bourbon because it's got
Mm-hmm.
an aged paper label with a black illustration and a touch of red on it," right? But to see something that is really different, you have to, as a client, you have to one really reckon with it, and two trust your brand partner. And I think always laddering back to strategy helps with that, right? If you can can show them how you're solving the problem and really articulate that. That's a huge part of what we do.
But it's a pretty easy trap to fall into, kind of going with the flow and the patterns that exist and the solutions that are kind of out there. So, like, tequila looks a certain way and bourbon looks a certain way, as you already pointed out. I guess it's like, how much of a brand should rely on some familiarity versus differentiation?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it really depends on the industry,
Hmm.
and the nature of the product. Where if you are if the product itself is revolutionary and never before seen and creating a new category, there are certain things you need to do to help people really understand what the hell it is, and how they can use it and fall in love with it and build affinity for it and all those things. If it's a well established category with just a wall of similar competition, um, my contrarian sort of rebellious nature says do the opposite of what everyone else is doing. And that is definitely a part of what we do. But there's also a tremendous amount of learning from what is working in
Hmm.
a category, that you can employ to either integrate into what you're doing in a different way or to subvert, but it can't just be this contrarian, sort of misanthropic thing where you're always doing the opposite of what everybody's doing. It's got to be a lot more nuanced than that. Um, there's this design thinker from back in, I think, the 60s, Raymond Loewy, and he had this thing called the Maya principle, most advanced yet acceptable, where the idea is you can only push things so far before society just can't wrap their head around it. Like the hydrogen car, folks are like, cars aren't hydrogen. I don't get it. We're not doing this. Um, so you've got to know how far you can push it before it just flies off the cliff and you're done. So there's a sensitivity there that you definitely build through experience.
To a young designer who wants to make things that are different but is falling into the trap of kind of this homogeny of design, maybe they're spending too much time looking at other references.
Yes.
How do they break out of that mindset or that trend?
The trend thing drives me insane. Like I harp about it a lot at the studio, and really everyone does kind of say, well, you can't do X, Y, or Z because it's been done a million times, or it's currently being done to death. Um, but the I mean, this, the best solutions come from life, not from design websites and magazines. They really come from an insight into life. And so I always urge our team, like, if you want visual inspiration, look at art, look at fashion, look at, X, Y, or Z, but don't look at other design. Like, you're experiencing it in a vacuum. It's a different thing than, it's just, if you can pull ideas from culture or from history or from obscure art from the 13th century or whatever it is, that's what's really interesting. And you'll always, through the nature of what we do, it will evolve into a more contemporary design conversation. But finding the weird, obscure inspiration, and I use weird as a huge compliment. Uh,
Agreed.
but finding that inspiration off screens and off the printed page, I think is just huge. And then in terms of teaching folks to think that way, there's a book by this guy Edward De Bono. It's called De Bono's Thinking Course, I think.
Wow. Okay.
I have a copy of it over here somewhere. But it's fairly academic, but it's a really great book to read as a young creative because it's basically it talks about neural bias and how we put things into buckets because it's how we make sense, and we learn, stove equals hot, don't touch stove. Like, that's how we survive. We learn to categorize things and we learn to think very linearly. If I do this, this is going to happen, etc. Creativity is the absolute opposite of that. Creativity's got to be lateral thinking. And there are all these interesting exercises in there to get your mind thinking laterally.
Mm.
One that I used to use when I was a young creative is I would go buy a magazine I had no interest in. Um, and I would think about the brand and flip through the magazine. What would the brand be if it were a shoe? What would the brand be if it were a dog? What would the brand be if it was a destination? And it just starts to get you thinking outside of the linear thinking that leads you to a name like International Business Machines, or it helps you find your way backwards to strategy and backwards to a solution that you wouldn't have gotten to normally, because you've tricked your brain into going way over here to then tie that back to strategy, if that makes sense.
I can recognize that at the early onset, I was most interested in just trying to make cool things, win
Yeah.
awards, become famous. That way I could make more money because more people knew me, and had a very, 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 like, I would say, childish mindset about how this industry and creativity works. But now, getting older, looking at the process, my sole kind of focus is mainly on how do I create an environment that the team wants to work in, and attract clients that are wonderful people to work with, that have creative ideas themselves and want creative work. So ultimately, that comes back to producing work that will attract that.
The famous designer phenomenon, which
Mm,
was huge when I was in graduate studies in Atlanta, where you had just these icons of design. And I don't know if that is as much of a thing anymore, because the playing field is so wide open now versus like a few events and a few magazines that can kind of be kingmakers. But I have a mentor who always said being a famous designer is like being a famous plumber. Like, all the other plumbers, think you're great, but
yeah.
the average person wouldn't look at you and go, "That person could plumb like a motherfucker. Look at that guy. He is just plumbing it." So it's a very geek
Yeah.
genre to be a famous designer. Um, Something I thought about when you were saying the second part is, oddly enough, the band Radiohead, where early in their career, they're like, we just want to be a real rock band, right? Like, I really want to just do it. I want to be able to do this thing and have people actually show up to see it and care about it. And from there, it's like, well, I want to have a hit album, right? Like, I want to have a really massive album. And they did that. And then they kind of took a step back and said, now I want to kind of explore the unknown and not do the traditional thing, and kind of find these new ways in which I can still create art or create this product, but really find a love and joy in doing it beyond just the object itself. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about, with the experience of design being bigger than just the end product as you
Mhm.
as you get deeper in your career.
I think now I just realize that through the process of making and contributing and working with founders and business owners and other organizations, and that I get to be a part of the co-creation of culture, even if it's a small subculture or pocket of it. Maybe it lives on the internet specifically, maybe it's physical out in the world, but that someone gets to see that, whether it's digital or physical, and interact with that. And maybe they love it, maybe they hate it, but they're at least thinking about it and they're feeling something at the end result. And I think that it's interesting because whether you love it or hate it, whether you talk about it or don't, whether you share it, you don't. It's just that thing exists, and it's a part of this subculture or part of the massive culture if you're working with large organizations, which I find just really exciting, regardless of the outcome.
I agree. I think it's equally valuable. I love an underdog and I like a weird little subculture. So I
Mm-hmm.
love diving into those. But it's fun to make a big, campaign for brand whoever that ends up in Times Square too. Like, they're both really satisfying. I think it's a really cool kind of pin to put in it, where creating culture should be part of the goal, right? It kind of goes back to that idea of bringing joy and value to people's lives. Like, how can the work that we do help to create a little bit of culture?
Mm-hmm.
Years ago, we did this campaign where we created, to communicate brand repositioning or a product repositioning. We created the first 99 pack of beer ever, um, which was intentionally ridiculous. It actually had a strategic purpose, which I won't go into. It really created this moment that sort of transcended selling beer to kind of creating culture, where it was a huge cultural moment in Austin. Like, people were driving all over town trying to find them and tracking there was like this live Twitter feed and everyone's tracking where the delivery vans are going so they can get one. And then it landed on national and international news on like Good Morning America and the front page of Reddit and Comedy Central and weird news in Germany. And it really was this weird little cultural moment in Austin that for just a blip, kind of touched the rest of the world and gave everybody a chuckle, you know? And that I'm super giddy about that. Because you shouldn't be able to do that with a tiny little brewery in Austin, Texas. But I think it's a good example of kind of the democratization of, if you've got a really good idea, it can spread in a way that is organic and interesting to folks.
Did it have like a plastic pack that had 99 of the top rungs that connected all of the beers too?
No, it was a box that was 7 feet plus long and weighed 90 something pounds. There's a great clip on Good Morning America where they say it's taller than Shaq, and it shows Shaq beside it, and clearly Shaq is taller than it is. Like it lists out their height. It wasn't taller than Shaq. It was huge and unwieldy, and it took two people to carry it properly, and it was absolutely ridiculous. And I love it to death.
What are the evergreen principles of design and communication that will transcend any sort of tool that we're using that kind of is fundamental to the creative process? That's a lot of what I've been focusing on recently in trying to understand like what is important to me, what are the ideas that I express, what is my weird position on things that is open to changing or expanding, but right now is helping me to achieve, X, Y, and Z goals.
Yeah, man, I think we're all in that moment, right? There's so much changing and there's so much on the horizon that we're all kind of asking ourselves those questions. My short answer stance on it is that I'm team humanity, which shouldn't be which hopefully is not a controversial thing to say. I think you're always going to need a human element, a human being. Pulling the levers and directing and value judging the work and using those things as a tool to kind of, even if it's creating something far beyond their vision, guiding it. At least the current nature of a lot of those platforms, whether it's AI or yada, 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 it really is a summarization and amalgamation tool. And if part of what we do and ways we bring value is to do something different and new that hasn't been seen before, then amalgamating all the results on Google and creating something is not going to do that. You're going to get more of the same. And it will technically be a right answer, but it's not going to put a dent in the universe, There's probably tech on the horizon right now that will just shoot down that theory in a heartbeat. But that's where I am today, and I feel pretty good about it.
I think the thing that I like and find refreshing with just like ideas is the way that they can spread. And I feel like I only have music examples when it comes to this, but I guess one thing that I find fascinating is that 70s psychedelia has spread throughout the world, and there's pockets of it in Vietnam that was popular during the Vietnam War. There's Afro psychedelia in like parts of Africa, and the music is absolutely phenomenal, but it sounds awesome. Yeah, and it sounds so unique, but it's taking those ideas and then applying culture and levels of other textures to it so that it does fundamentally become its own maybe subculture or genre within a genre. And I think that those types of ideas always get me the most excited when it's layering of different things that seem like they have no business colliding, but because the world is so small and big at the same time, they do.
It's kind of like I was saying earlier, where I'm urging the team to use art or fashion or whatever as an inspiration. It's still going to come through their lens and their hands and minds. So it's going to be tinted and obscured and changed through that process. It's still going to be theirs. And it's like the African psychedelia you're talking about, which is fantastic, by the way. I went down a big rabbit hole with that last summer. There's a site I'll send you when we're off here that basically is a giant image of the globe with all these little points on it, and you
Mm.
can move the globe around, zoom in, zoom out, and click on any of these, and it's an independent radio station wherever you click.
Oh,
So you
cool.
can listen to music in Nairobi, or you can listen to Tanzania and whatever. Or I mean, it's oh my god,
That's
it's so
amazing.
fun to explore. You would love it. You would geek
Yeah.
out big time.
That sounds like probably the way that I'll like engage with music from like now on instead of just jumping on Spotify as a first choice.
It can steal your time and crush your productivity. So,
Yeah.
but it's
Yeah.
fantastic.
Sometimes I need a good rabbit hole to jump into, I guess, change the way I think sometimes.
I think we all do. When you listen to music while you work, can you listen to music with lyrics or podcasts while you work, or do you need like instrumental
Hmm.
background situations?
This is actually a great question. And I feel like it depends on the task.
Yeah,
Um, if I actually need to think, there can't be lyrics.
same.
And I default to I guess like either like jazz or lo-fi beats or something of that nature. I can't say the name of the band, but they're from Texas, like Karun Bing, like
Oh, Krungabin. Yeah, they're great. Yes.
so that's how you say it.
Well, maybe I could be completely wrong,
I don't know.
but yeah, they're fantastic. I'm the exact same way. We should honestly start trading playlists on that stuff.
Yes,
Because I
definitely.
beat explosions into the sky, into the ground to the point where I just couldn't do it anymore. And I love that
Hmm.
band. But yeah, lately for me, the past like year and a half, it's been jazz, like a lot of Grant Green, a lot of Hank Mobley. But I
Mm-hmm.
can't do lyrics. I can't do anything with lyrics and think straight. Yeah, I do think in another life I would have loved to have been just like a retouching artist and just listen to podcasts and music with lyrics and just eat THC gummies all day and just noodle with photos. I would have loved that.
I just watched. It's on Disney Plus. I think that you would like it too, Christian. The John Williams documentary. If you
Oh,
haven't
I
seen
heard an ad for that the other day. I need to check that out.
that, got me so hyped, and it goes into parts of his career prior to him, doing the music for all the movies that we love. But he had a stint as like a jazz musician and composer and had a band. And prior to being like the movie guy, he was like the jazz guy, which is like not a part of him that I ever would
Yeah,
imagine. But then you hear the Cantina song from Star Wars, and you're like,
totally.
yeah, there's no way that he couldn't have played jazz.
I don't know whose theory this was, but it's kind of the value of what they call a T-shaped person, where you have one deep like area of expertise, but you have
Mm.
all these little miniature areas of expertise that kind of make the top of the T. Um, I went to journalism school in college at UNC, and they make you take just a really wild, disparate range of courses because the idea is like a good journalist knows a little bit about a lot of things. And it really makes a good designer too. And it makes a good John Williams, where like you're pulling from all these different pieces, and you would never, as an outsider, say, well, he's definitely a former jazz musician. But then when you
Mhm.
find out, you start to notice it in the work. I think that's really cool.
I was actually curious, having stalked all of the information I could on LinkedIn and other sources, how going to school for journalism impacts the way that you view the world and how it applies to the world of design
Yeah.
and the way that you think.
Yeah, it definitely is that T-shaped person for sure. Where instead of taking like the obligatory sort of college courses, I was taking like linguistics 45, language and power, and how words have changed over time and been reclaimed by subcultures. And it really is just like this opportunity to go down all these wild rabbit
Mm.
holes of education. And I think it teaches you to be curious, which I think is a huge part of not just being a designer and brand person, but to life. It's just being curious. And the other is suspending judgment and not trying to force the outcome of a story or have a story tie into a perfect bow. Like life's messy, and sometimes things don't come to a definitive conclusion. You have to sort of let the cards play out as they play out versus force a narrative, I guess. And I think those are all like that's a hard thing to do in life. Like we all very much crave control because it's comfortable and we feel like we're safe in control. But really opening up to letting things unfold and experiencing them that way, I think is really valuable as you get older. I'm not very good at it, but I think about it a lot and talk about it a lot to try to get better at it, if that makes sense.
Are there any particular books that you found are particularly interesting in other fields other than design that you are either reading right now or have read and have impacted you?
I read a lot of music biographies. Oh my God, the Replacements book that came out a couple of years ago is so good.
Mm.
Or Meet Me in the Bathroom, which kind of chronicles New York City indie rock culture when I was living up there and a little bit before. But it's whether it's that or John T. Edge's book, Pot Liquor Papers, on the food history of the South. Like, you just find all these metaphors for what we do. And sometimes reading about a tangential field that is also creative, you just get more insight into what you do because it's not a one-to-one. I don't read a lot of design books, although I do have a few that I absolutely love and go back to. Zag by Barney Newmeyer, and anything Marty Newmeyer writes, everybody should read. But it's really less branding and it's more that tangential stuff that I get really excited about.
I love kind of comparing different fields to design. So I think music is an easy one. There's like a very, I don't know, it seems like tangible with how people talk on Twitter, like to hip hop culture and like that hustle culture to like
Yeah.
modern freelance design work.
Oh, that's great. Surprised I didn't mention earlier is comedy, where I think comedy is such a great field that's a metaphor or sort of a back and forth, where we talked earlier about working on something and it not working in the beginning. We're working on a computer with a team and a creative director. So if it fails and it's not working, there's a support system there. If you fail, if you're working on a new joke and you're doing it up in front of a room full of people, and if it falls flat, like you were up there by yourself in real time. So it is like trial by fire. And so I listened to a lot of comedy podcasts and even have read Born Standing Up by Steve Martin. It's an amazing book about creativity. But yeah, comedy is a really cool example of just like tenacity and workshopping things until they're good. And often finding the offhand piece or the mistake that turns out to be the whole thing. There's a lot of learning there for sure.
There's obviously the failing upward where you have to try, you have to bomb, you have to continue to get up there time and time again to refine your, let's say your special or your tight 10 or tight 5, whatever you're working on at the time. So there's definitely like not being afraid to fail, which I think is a skill that we've already talked about in this podcast a little bit already, but something that we need to establish as creative individuals in general, not being afraid to like have an idea bomb, hopefully in a safe, controlled environment with our teams and not the client.
Not in a major client presentation.
Yeah.
Speaking of just massive bombs, we had a presentation years ago, a national presentation with Sam Adams. Long story short, the work was good, but there was an audio issue with their webinar program that we were using to present. Essentially, there was like a 4 or 5 second lag on the audio that came back at you. So you were hearing your voice after you had said it coming back at you. And it is one of the most disorienting things you can experience in a presentation. It went terribly. You can't even, my designer, I won't say her name and embarrass her, but she couldn't even make sense. Like it was just word salad because it's just too discombobulating to have your words coming back to you. And it was absolutely terrible. And we had a pause. And they were just stone-faced and not amused. And you could tell they were just thinking, this is not great. And so I tried to lighten the mood and said, well, guys, this is going great. And that's the response I was hoping for. Nothing. just like you could see people start to check their phones. And I was like, oh, this is so bad. I wish we had it recorded because it is comedy gold.
Oh
Like it was just
man.
everything that went wrong could have. Um,
Well, that's another benefit of comedy in general. Hopefully, it changes the mood and is uplifting, and that's like a whole different aspect of it. Like being charming and personable in a room with clients has its own fundamental benefit. The other thing that I was thinking about with comedy too is like analyzing a special or the performative nature of it, and the storytelling aspect is incredible. To keep someone's attention for that long on
right?
stage is a skill that you have to be successful in that industry. But obviously, but something that I think about all the time, whether I'm talking to a client or presenting on a stage like for a conference or something of that nature, it's like it should be fun, it should be light, there should be moments of suspense. And how do we use those tools in our presentations, small scale or large scale, to bring delight, to bring
Yes.
emotional pauses, and then build up to climactic moments, or even just use self-deprecating humor to make others feel like light or powerful in the moment
Yeah.
to add levity.
All of the above, man. It's the best. I love presenting to clients for that reason. Um, because much like a stand-up comic, I've been doing it so long that like I know when you walk into the room, A, the work's good, right? The material is great. But B, if this goes horribly, I go home to my wife and kids. Life is good. I crack open a beer and play chess with my son. Like life is fantastic, right? It's not going to crush my soul for this to go badly. So there's a freedom there to like relax and make jokes and be lighthearted. One of the I love everything you said in that and the building of it. It made me think of two things. One, we do a lot of naming, and I love naming. I hated
Mm.
it as a young creative because it's really hard. Not even just coming up with names, but helping clients understand what a name is and what it will do, and how names work before there's the cool can to hold or the amazing environment to work in. Like it's a challenge. We're really good at it now. But one of the things that I love to do is when we do naming presentations, there's a moment where when you're first introduced to a name option, it's just an image with the name laid over it on the screen and it just sits there. And I let it sit for 5, 6, 7 seconds. And I just look at the client and I don't say a word. And it's so uncomfortable for young team members because they're like, no, just start explaining it. Start explaining it. You got to let it sit there. Like that
Mhm.
pause, silence is golden, man. There's a confidence and a trust in that that I think is really good. When you're young in the industry and you present, you're naturally kind of rigid. And I think because you're less confident in your experience, you tend to sometimes over explain things or try to use a lot of like really sophisticated branding terms to like just
Yeah.
academically just leverage the client into knowing that it's good. And I work really hard now to explain things as simply and basically as possible. Like no fancy words, no buzz terms, none of that. Like how do you explain it like you're explaining it to your mom or somebody you see on the street, you know? There's so much more value in that. And I think it's just more real and personable.
And in talking without jargon, you don't have to explain yourself. Like you don't need to talk about kerning to someone who doesn't give a shit.
Oh God, no. We had this presentation with our BlackBerry client years ago, and my designer Ben came up with me, and he made the mistake of getting into a debate with the client of the difference between two typefaces. And this is like it's Mary Celeste Bill, who is an amazing person and a very powerful force in hospitality. And she said, "Well, you use the same typeface on these two." And Ben said, "Oh, it's no, they're not the same at all. This is more of a humanist." Yeah, and he just broke down everything. And she's like, "Same typeface." And Ben dug in more, and he's like, "No, the differences are astounding." Like, and he just gets really geeky about it. And she's like, Looks the same to me, same typeface. And it was just like this, you could just see his mind exploding. So it's something we say around the studio a lot, like same typeface. Like
Mhm.
we're way in the weeds on this.
Well, I guess it goes to show like you kind of need that test. So maybe you can do that in house with like writers or someone else on your team that is maybe more on like strategy versus visual that you can like run it by them. But my wife is the unfortunate guinea pig that
Oh,
I
same. My wife or my kids, even. Yeah,
yeah.
I'll flag down whoever. I'm shameless. Absolutely.
Most of the time I just want to know that I'm not crazy.
I think that's a big part of what we do. Yeah,
Hmm.
I agree.
I'm curious how being in Austin for an extended period of time has shaped you formatively and helped to hone your design aesthetic and language. You had shared the tale of coming from North Carolina. You had talked about living in New York. Obviously, those are all going to be formative memories and contribute to who you are and your lived reality. So maybe it's a two-part question. How has Austin shaped you, but how has kind of your travels also shape the way that you think about the world and design?
Great questions. You're like, this is hot ones level question and answer. So good job.
Thank you.
Um, so Austin has been huge in terms of formative experience. I moved here in 2003, which is crazy. And Austin was pretty sleepy design and brand wise when I moved here. There was not a lot going on. There weren't a lot of agencies. There were kind of a few key players and a few key people who were doing work that mattered. But there wasn't nearly the design culture here. That, and I moved from New York. I was in Manhattan and moved down. Didn't know a soul. And and fortunately was able to, as a young, really motivated, overeager, to the point of probably being annoying design and brand guy, able to do a lot and make a name for myself and accomplish a lot just through the sheer will and, again, annoyance of I just I don't want to hear him talk anymore. Just let him design it. And really, good work begets good work begets good work. We've been able to grow the agency with the city
Mm,
in this kind of beautiful parallel path. And in the process, we've been able to build a lot of the brands that make Austin Austin. Whether it's Austin Beer Works or Alamo Draft House or Howler Brothers or Tacovas or all these really great, fun brands that are part of the fabric of Austin. And I try not to take that for granted.
mm,
But it really has been this parallel path with the growth of the agency and the city and the growth of me as a person and Austin as a culture. It's been tremendously valuable. I wish I could say I strategically put my hand on the map and said, this is where the next thing's going to happen, and I'm going to get there right before it does. I did not. I was
mm.
burned out in New York and visited here for a creative conference and fell in love and just said, I don't know if I'll be able to have a meaningful career there, but at least I'll be really happy. And it just really, really worked out. It's not if you build it, they will come. It's if you come, you can build it.
This is a big thing on the Helms website, creating an unfair advantage and making a dent in the universe. So I wanted to touch on that because we've talked about like the creativity side of it, what like branding is, but I think that there's the whole business side of it and how it connects to branding. And that's kind of like the secrets that maybe you have to unveil over a long career to try and make that impact. And how do you make like a monetary contribution to the client, which I think we're all trying to do with our work, but maybe we don't see the metrics so clearly. But let's just go through some quick numbers here that you sent over to me so that I didn't have to do the hard homework. But
Oh God.
the Tacovas rebrand tripled revenue to 30 million. You guys rebranded Southern Comfort for a 544 million sale by Brown Forman to Sazerac, if I'm saying that correctly. You so Diageo was acquired by Lone River Ranch Water after 12 months in the market. And then Rheingeist Brewery is consistently listed as one of the fastest growing breweries. So I
Yeah.
mean that's huge. This is all a long-winded way of saying, like, how do we create that unfair advantage for our clients, whether it's through physical products or branding or digital, and make a unique dent in the universe.
We really are increasingly big on metrics. In in building a brand in the work that we do, it can get really squishy really quickly, where it's hard for a client to understand the return on their investment.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I very much want the client to see tangible results on the investment. We were in a conversation earlier today where I was walking a client through this. With transparency and very specific goals, you could do that. So that's kind of the academic side of it. Um, the other side is that branding represents an unfair advantage in the marketplace because most people don't think about branding the way you and I think about branding. Like, we are way too inside baseball.
Mm.
The average person experiences brands and loves them or hates them or is indifferent to them. Um, and they don't spend a moment contemplating that. It's the opposite of that academic exercise we talked about earlier. But if you dig deep and create an experience for folks that takes them out of their everyday, that transports them, one of the exercises we do in strategy with brands is where will the brand transport someone to? What will it invite them to do? What will it inspire them to do? We kind of have this metric that we do. If you can nail that stuff, you can create an absolute unfair advantage in the marketplace. I mean, statistics are transparent that if there are two comparable products on the shelf, people will buy the one that they have more affinity for. They'll buy the one that they like more, despite price, unless it's just astronomical. And that's a whole strategy in itself, where sometimes putting the price up here actually makes it more valuable. But people will buy the one that they want to be associated with more, and we can create that. A statistic we don't put out there a whole lot, that I've always just really loved, is we built a sparkling water brand years ago. And one of the things that I was proudest of, the brand was really bombastic and dynamic, and we had influence on the flavors. So there was instead of just like lime, lemon, cherry, it was like habanero, mango, jalapeno, serrano, pickle flavor. Like the flavors were crazy. And then there was just like a plain water version. And the plain water version outsold all of the generic and in-store brands at like 1.5 or 2x the price.
Mm.
It's water and air in a can. Like, it's water and
Mm-hmm.
carbon dioxide in a can. There is no difference between everything on the shelf. Ours was made in the same place that the in-store brand was made. And it outsold them like crazy only because of brand. Like, it's the cleanest example I have that you can leverage brand to influence customer decision, and it's all because it was cooler and more exciting. And if I'm going to drink a plain sparkling water, I'm going to drink it from the folks who make the crazy pickle flavor.
It's like you had said, that affinity towards something is driving the purchasing decision, which I think is something that we experience. Like, if you're at a bodega, you can definitely get overwhelmed by the amount of choices, but you're going to grab the thing that's either you're familiar with, that you had as a kid, or the one that is kind of the coolest, that wouldn't embarrass you walking out of the store with. So
Totally. We're doing a big rebrand, and it's for a brewery. And one of the questions that we posed really as a team is with their team is, what does it say right now when you walk into a party with a six pack of X? And what do we want it to say about you when you walk into a party with a six pack of X? That's huge.
it's an interesting thought exercise of how does this item in the world represent me? Would I share this with a friend? And is it embarrassing? Is it cool? And kind of the your kind of pocket of reality and culture and how that's all received. And I find that it's refreshing in a way that it that we can have a job where we can think about that stuff, make decisions, and make cool work and get paid. It's kind of a astonishing thing if you think about it.
You build up a tolerance, you build up a thick skin, you build up all this stuff. But I think it's really important to remind ourselves every so often, like we get to do this for a living. Like we make stuff in a very simple way. We make stuff for a living, that people get to experience and enjoy, and that goes out into the world and creates all these interactions and moments that we can't even imagine. It's huge.
Hmm.
It's a big deal. I try to remind myself at the beginning of every project, like this is the opportunity to do that. And you can't ever take that for granted.
Hmm.
Um, you've got to treat every opportunity not just as an opportunity to do great work for yourself, but to do something meaningful for your client partner. Um, there are easier ways to make money than what we do, for sure. Like
Yeah.
it is, but it's such a joy to do, and it if we do it right, it brings value. Um, I have a friend who's a scientist, and I had a beer with him months ago, and he said, "Man, I don't know how you do what you do because every day you have to reinvent the wheel." And my response was, "Yeah, but every day we get to reinvent the wheel.
Hmm.
It's great. It's
Yeah.
great."
That's such an interesting thing to hear because that would be someone's worst nightmare and then someone's like biggest joy.
Totally.
So two people can be at the opposite ends of the spectrum and it just comes down to the individual. So it may be a good point to reflect on if there's any tension inside of the the audience listening, like where is that coming from? Is it just that you just need a break, or do you need to reassess the type of people that you're working with? Or is there a tension within you that you're not enjoying this? Or are you really enjoying this process and you just want to do more? I'm assuming more are in the camp of that because they're listening to this podcast, trying to glean insights or a perspective, or maybe just be validated that they're not crazy, which is a lot of what I do on a day to day basis.
I have worked really shitty jobs with great people, and I've worked really great jobs with shitty people, and the former has always been better. You
Mm-hmm.
can work a shitty job with amazing people, and it's a joy to go to work every day and to do what you do. You can have what is on paper an amazing job, and if the people are terrible, it's not an experience you want to have. We literally have on our website one of our non-negotiables is we don't work with assholes, and that includes us, right? It's life is too short to work with folks who are toxic or disrespectful or whatever. And when we put that on the website a while back, there was some concern that it was a little too brash, but it is proven to be nothing but a fantastic filtering tool where folks get a huge kick out of it and want to work with us. And whoever saw it and doesn't want to work with us probably knows who they are and made the decision appropriately is all I can figure.
A lot of what we've been talking about is making the bold decision. And I think there's an inherent value in making those brave, bold decisions, whether it's that copywriting on the website or doing the weird idea and just putting it out there, even if it bombs. And that could be just a general theme from this conversation
Hmm.
is having the courage to do that bold choice and see where it leads, and then knowing that you can always pivot or change to get to a better or more perfect designed end destination.
All I can say is I agree. I think you summed that up so beautifully. I can't add to it. That's perfect.
On your website, kind of in that same sort of area of the we don't work with assholes, this idea of branding is bonding, And how can branding be used to foster a natural and lasting relationship with your customers that feels effortless? And I think there's two parts of that, that it's the fostering relationship and the feeling effortless. So those are maybe two different parts if you can dive into either one of those.
Yeah, it kind of ties back to the humanity piece I was talking about earlier. Something that we really focus on and talk about a lot is talking to people like they're people. Um, it's easy to get caught up in demographics and KPIs and all those things, and they're important. But funny enough, as everything kind of scales up and evolves and gets more digital and more targeted, just speaking like a person to another person is really valuable. I mean, I think we've seen that in a parallel field in how user generated content has become so important through social media advertising, where an ad doesn't have the punch that just someone speaking as a person has. And so it's something that we do very much with brands as well, where um, where we want to meet people where they are and talk to them in a way that feels real and human and really reflects the humanity of the founder or the team or the spirit behind the brand. That's a biggie. And then branding is bonding is just the idea that it should be an ongoing conversation. It shouldn't be us talking at you. It should be a back and forth, and there should be a shared kinship there. And ideally you're building community and you are building a sustained conversation with the people who are interested in your brand. What we do is so simple and so complex at the same time, but you can cut through the clutter by being human.
Especially in a ever growing digital AI age. I think that it is important to hear.
And then tagging back to what you said about being natural and effortless. If we do our work the right way, it should appear effortless. It should appear obvious and like it just fell down from heaven and landed perfectly formed in front of you. It shouldn't feel strategized. It shouldn't feel like it has KPIs behind it. It should just feel effortless.
Do you have an example of a scenario where the work didn't feel effortless in its execution and you learned from that and fixed it? Or do you have ways of seeing that something is appearing not effortless and kind of course correcting from there?
It kind of tags back to showing your wife, showing your kids, showing whoever, right? It's like you need a fresh perspective. The longer you do this, the more you can think like a consumer and you can think like a client. You can shift your perspective. But having a fresh read is always great in the right situations. It has to be a fully baked conversation. The worst you can do is ask for input from a bunch of people when it's still in a nebulous phase because you're just going to create this maelstrom of opinion that's not good.
Even getting feedback can be this really treacherous terrain because if you're not asking for specific things, you're going to get a hodgepodge of different opinions that could potentially steer you in a wrong direction. And obviously it's like knowing who you're asking the feedback from, who you're getting the feedback from. Like an anonymous survey poll is different than asking a targeted question to your design team or your wife or your kid. So like having those specific questions to focus the lens of the feedback is something that I've been trying to get better at, but understand like what it is that I'm even asking and what is the result that I'm trying to get from this.
Yeah, totally. Because what you want to hear is, I love it and I love you, right?
Yeah.
Um, but no, we've actually, this is a really cool conversation because I haven't talked about this with another head of a brand agency, but we've been doing more and more to teach clients how to give feedback, especially like we work on such a broad range of clients from like global clients to like tiny startups. And you hit them with this tremendous amount of visual, verbal, and strategic information. And then you say, what do you think? And People will full on make up a response just to have something to say if they don't know what they're going to say. You see it in consumer testing all the time. Um, but we've been teaching clients how to give feedback. Like, hey, here are the ways that you can best inform the next steps of the process. And we kind of walk them through that. And it definitely varies from client to client how you do that. And again, it's extra work. It's not scoped work. Those hours aren't accounted for.
Mhm.
They actually are if Ryan's building the estimate, but but it gives them a framework to have the conversation, and it also gives them a framework to process what they're experiencing. So it's really valuable. It kind of tags back to a lot of what we talked about, like the brilliance of the work is often the stuff in between the work, the kind of
Mm.
pieces between the big presentations and the large pieces that kind of are the glue that hold it all together and move it all forward.
We talked about plumbers earlier, but you don't you don't ask like the plumber doesn't say like, "What do you think of your new toilet?"
Right. They're like, done. I solved it. Pay me. Right.
Yeah. Which is a very different thing. They're not telling you the strategy of fixing the toilet, which approach they're going to take.
Yeah. Even a chef doesn't come out after the meal and go, do you like the meal? Yeah. That's hilarious. And we don't do that either, by the way. Terrible analogy. But yeah, exactly. That's the weird, perverse part of the industry that we are, is that, yeah, it is. As much as we love strategy and results and metrics and KPIs and all these things, there is a subjective nature to what we do that is nebulous, that we can never completely
Hmm.
quantify in spreadsheet. It's why we started doing it in the first place, right? We didn't
Yeah.
want spreadsheets. We wanted that stuff. But as we start to run an agency, we start to find the ways to quantify those things to help propel the project forward, and sometimes to help clients get out of their own way and make the right decision that's going to be successful for them, even though it's a tough decision or a challenging decision or whatever.
Like you had said earlier, insider baseball, what we're doing on a day to day basis, but they may have no experience with a brand agency. You could be their very first experience with that. There's a lot of learning to be done there, and feedback is definitely a huge part of that. Like, what what do you need from them to continue to move forward, like you had mentioned, but also just like what is kind of on the table to talk about. Like if there's a gut reaction that they're having, they need to be able to share that. There needs to be openness and transparency, but there's obviously if you've done the strategy leading up to the visuals, you can fall back on that to make decisions and be like, hey, we already signed off on this. Is that something that you'd like to change? Do you feel that now versus how we did it in the beginning is different? And just like having one, the logic side, two, the instinctual emotional side covered, and balancing all of that. I mean, humans are complicated.
Yeah, you just painted a great sort of picture of how tough it is to do what we do. Like, there's so many factors. There's logic, but then there's emotion. There's strategy, but then there's reaction. There are all these different pieces. Um, I have such a affinity for our green young entrepreneur, not even young, but just new entrepreneur clients who haven't been through the brand process yet. I love shepherding them through that process. And it's different every time. But what I've found primarily is that you just got to knock the first thing you do out of the park.
Mhm.
So that's probably brand strategy and or naming. Once you do that, they get it and they see the value, not the value, but they see like, oh, this is, I can trust these guys. Like, they are
Mhm.
not only crushing it, but they knew things about me that I didn't realize I knew until they said it. Like, those are the moments in strategy that just like are awesome, where
Yeah.
you, because really all you're doing in strategy is holding up a mirror. To say it the simplest way, like, these folks see me, like they understand who we are and why we are and what we want to do in a deeper way. And they've articulated it in a deeper way than we ever could. Like, if you nail that first part, they're on team Helms Workshop. Like, they
Mhm.
will follow your lead and they will they will be enthusiastic and excited about all the parts moving forward. And it lets you shepherd them through the process in a really fun and meaningful way. It's the best. Like, I love when we have those clients who go from like, how does this work? And what do you do? And we've had clients who are like, I've been told I need this, but I don't know why.
Hmm.
And normally you'd run from that. You'd be like,
Yeah.
my job is not to convince you of our value. Like, we want clients who understand our value from the beginning. But every so often you get those folks where you're like, this is something, and they just need a little bit of education. And I honestly enjoy doing that.
And those type of clients will weed themselves out, or potential clients will weed themselves out, where if they ask that question and you explain it to them and they're like, but can you do it for less? Then it's just like, it's generally like they will find their way to weasel out of it or not respond to your email next. But if they're inquisitive and curious and they're like, okay, I can understand that value and why I would need this, then it's, shoring up that fit.
Yeah. And you have to, experience helps you see that coming. What is someone who needs a little bit of education versus just a value shopper who's
Mm-hmm.
like, I'm going to get 5 quotes from 5 agencies and go with the cheapest one.
Yep.
If you've ever done major home renovation, you know how that works out.
Yeah.
You just get to do it twice, which is fantastic. Um, but yeah, so much of it is just experience. I mean, I think that's a huge part of my value at the agency is this at this point is just having done it so many times that I can see things coming and counsel my team on what to expect. Um, I'm mentoring an awesome young designer student from Belarus right now, and she constantly is saying, "How do you know this stuff, or how do you come up with this stuff so quick?" And it's muscle memory. It's you do it so much. You've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. You've seen a million ways to do it. So it's just your portfolio or the arrow. You have many arrows in your quiver, right?
Yeah.
Versus just kind of a singular arrow.
So the question I had for you, and that we can either get into or not, uh, since you have talked about it before, is your experience with Lyme disease and how that impacted the way that you work and actively run your studio. Is that terrain that you want to traverse?
Yeah, I can give you kind of a top line summary. It's a long story, honestly.
Okay.
So years ago, I got randomly hit with Lyme disease, which unfortunately is a disease that not a lot of people understand or know about or know how to treat. So long story short, I had about a year of dealing with pretty crippling symptoms before I was even diagnosed. So um, chronic fatigue, couldn't walk across the room without having to sit down. Fibromyalgia and major joint pain, physical pain. I felt like I used to say I felt like an 80-year-old man, but my dad turned 82 yesterday and he will punch somebody out. He is fight strong. So I'll now say a 110-year-old man. Um, and the brain fog, if you told me a phone number, I couldn't get to paper and write it down. If it was right in front of me before, I would forget the numbers. Like it was crippling. And the worst part was not knowing what was going on and having folks say it's in your head or whatever. So I flew all over the country. I finally got diagnosed. I met with dozens of doctors and finally found this crazy homeopathic doctor who's like a best kept secret up in Pennsylvania, um, who you kind of have to know somebody to even work with. And we worked together for like 2 years to get me healthy again. And that story in itself is the wildest, craziest up and down cycle of trying just some of the wildest remedies you could imagine, from very conventional stuff to just very unconventional stuff. Um, and it was really challenging for my family. It was really challenging for my relationship with my young son, my wife. She was an absolute just you know pillar in that whole thing. But I was able to get healthy again. And one of the silver linings was I was on such a strict protocol of health regimen that my wife kind of did a lot of that with me. We have 2 kids. Our first kid, we had to do 2 years of in vitro and all that stuff to make happen, because we couldn't have a kid naturally. And through the craziness of all this treatment program and my wife kind of doing the same thing, we got magically pregnant, which was not supposed to be able to happen. So
Wow.
that's why we have a 13-year-old and a 7-year-old, is because we were not
Wow.
supposed to be able to have a kid, but all this crazy health protocol gave us our second kid, which we always wanted. Um, and coming out of that just changed my perspective on life and work and what we do. And the way I tend to talk about it is just, it tags back to something we talked about earlier, where just being curious and keeping open a sense of wonder. Like,
Mm.
this is the world we live in is insane. There's magic everywhere. There's wonder everywhere. And it's not just about like a big epic revelation. It's wonder is equally present or more important in little moments, if you appreciate them. And the trick
Mm.
is to really be tuned in to that frequency so that you notice these little moments of wonder everywhere. There
Mm.
really is joy and wonder and value and something to take away from almost every experience and every interaction if you're looking for it.
Mm.
And it's something I carried away from that I still talk about and think about every day. It's not a frequency I'm always on. I mean, I literally, coming out of that, I was like, I will never not think about this. And the truth is, it's like you have to hold on to it. It's like a foreign language or your tennis game, right? You got to like keep on top of it and exercise it to make it stick. But
Mm.
it's something that I try to kind of carry as a torch with me to to remind myself.
I think about like some Buddhist teachings, some like Christian teachings, and they're all trying to get to that root of kind of like keeping the mystery open and having this sense of wonder. And it's something that maybe a lot of us grow up with, but maybe ignore or don't reflect on or practice that muscle as you had said. So it's definitely something that I will think about more intentionally in the moments.
We're born with it. Like, kids have it. Kids can get lost in a moment and appreciate just that singular experience without what's before, what's after, or what might be. Um, and we kind of get that worn out of us, just like the spirit of being an artist gets worn out of folks as they become older. We are essentially, what we are born with is what we're all fighting to get back to, which is a sense of wonder and freedom and independence and lack of concern about anything exterior and only our experience. Um, we have it and then we lose it, and then we spend our lives trying to fight to get it back, which I think is kind of beautiful and kind of frustrating at the same time.
Yeah, I was gonna say frustrating and poetic all at the same
Yeah,
time.
there you go. Poetic's better.
That's beautiful. That's an incredible insight and nugget to just like continue to ruminate on and think about the mystery of it all.
Well, I appreciate it. Britt, you're really great at this. This has been one of the more enjoyable conversations I've had in a while. And if we just want to get together at 3 o'clock tomorrow, we can just keep this going and
Oh
you
yeah.
know, just run our businesses into the ground while we chat. Thanks, Brett. I very much enjoyed it.
To the audience, remember that we're all legendary and have an amazing story of our own. So on that journey, take the time to be kind, grind, and unwind, and let's make the world a better and more creative place. Christian, thank you again for being here.